Okay, hello lovely people, my name's Stephen Colbert. Today we're reading chapter 4 of I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. And chapter 4 is about the village. So we're going to have a really interesting contrast obviously between Pashto culture, as always, and kind of the semi-modern lifestyle that she tries to live in her everyday life, and kind of, modern US TV and all those sort of things that she talks about a fair bit. In our tradition, on the 7th day of a child's life, we have a celebration called Woma, which means seventh for family. My parents say I have qualities of both grandparents, so I'm just jumping around for the quotes that are the best, and I'll only read out what you kind of have to annotate. So my parents say I have the qualities of both grandfathers, humorous and wise like my mother's father and vocal like my father's father. Baba had grown soft and white-bearded, which is not necessarily that important, but we always annotate beards because it seemed to me, at least, from when I read this story, that there was something symbolic about beards. So whether beards represent wisdom or just decrepitude or being very old is up to you to decide, I guess. But they would probably, what have I got here? We've got them as a symbol. So they came up often, but they weren't kind of something that ran through the entire piece. So presumably beards is only focused in the start of the story, when we're focusing, of course, on Pashto culture. So Eid happens twice a year. Eid al-Fitr, or small Eid, marks the end of Ramadan fasting month, and Eid al-Azha, or big Eid, commemorates the Prophet Abraham's readiness to sacrifice his son Ismail to God. So we've just got this little, my attempt at a Islamic symbol to try and kind of summarise when she speaks about religion, because often she'll just sort of, she's conscious, I guess, that her readership is not familiar with these cultural elements, so part of the time she's just sort of teaching us things that she would like us to know, so we can kind of get a picture of where she's come from. So my brothers liked it if we got one with F-16 fighter jets or nuclear missiles. And my father said if our politicians hadn't spent so much money on building an atomic bomb, we might have enough money for schools. So logically, we're going to start off with gender roles. So the boys want one thing and the girls want something else. And then we've got it for corruption. I don't know if that's really corruption, but I'm sure that her father, Ziadun, would see it that way. So yeah, if they hadn't spent so much money on bombs, they would have enough for schools, which is kind of a common argument that people sort of say. And I've also got activism as well, because that's his view of the world, that's how that would work. Foreigners call them suicide bridges, but we love them. So this is kind of when you cross a river by a rope. So I've got our little compass symbol here, the difference between Western and Eastern views on things. So quite often, she'll say stuff just so that you are aware of, basically keep in mind that she's in London when part of this story is written, at least, and so there's that kind of awareness of a new culture that she exists within, and kind of the need to make it clear the differences as we go, I guess. So see the golden peak of Spin Gar lit with the first rays of the sun, like a white lady wearing a jumatika, a gold chain on her forehead. So we've got here a simile, so this is a literary device, and we've also just got the fact that it's talking about Pashto culture. So there's not too many kind of literary devices, as you can see from the list. We've got foreshadowing, metaphor, simile, irony, imagery, foreshadowing, intertextual references and allusions, and non-linear narrative. But it's mostly relatively straightforward, not too floral, not too descriptive. So when there's a simile, we very urgently annotate that. So my father told me he used to think of it as a symbol of peace for our land, a white flag at the end of our valley. So the white mountains everywhere. I believe, am I remembering correctly, that we have kind of nature as a motif for good things. So that's part of what she misses, as we'll find out later when she's in London. The kind of the natural beauty of her land is something she often pines for, to accidentally use a pun, because pine is a kind of tree. We've got here, all cooked over by the fire by the women. So of course, as she'll often sort of remind us, if she were to have remained in Pakistan, then this is kind of, would have been her lot, cooking, cleaning, and sort of doing the womanly duties rather than continuing her schooling, as we know that she did. In fact, I think just recently she graduated from Oxford, if my remembering is correct. So here we've got on 52, of course this only applied to the men. Women in our area don't vote. So that's gender roles, of course. And yeah, that's, it's actually quite surprising if you spend some time looking up, it doesn't look very good on the screen. If you look up just in different places when women got the vote, you'd be quite surprised, I guess. So our favourite game was weddings. Again, we've got gender roles. So when the boys and the girls play, that's what they're doing, talking about getting married and traditional gender roles throughout. 53, recited what we call tapi. I imagine that's incorrectly pronounced, but there we go. Pashto couplets. So Pashto culture and reading, and so you can see she's sort of grown up in a very literate and a place where oracy is important, so the ability to speak well is crucial, and the ability to read well also. So again, 53 bottom, and turn you into a dirty woman with hair like rats. So again, that's a rare simile, so we annotate the hell out of that because that might be useful when we come to comment on Malala's writing style, and maybe Christina Lamb's as well, because she's our co-author, or ghostwriter, I guess is the best way to say it, so sort of make sure it makes sense. Why isn't she covered? He replied, she's my daughter, look after your own affairs. So that's Dad being an activist, and also again a contrast between expectations of their culture and what actually happens instead. So we've got here not properly following Pashtunwali. So again, I've got a little note there that just says critical of culture, which I might add in pen so you can see it, but it becomes clear that father doesn't necessarily believe in all of the cultural artifacts of the place that he lives, and so of course Malala mirrors that as well. We've got, I'm very proud to be a Pashtun, but sometimes I think our code of conduct has a lot to answer for, particularly where the treatment of women is concerned. So there you go. As promised, you can kind of quite clearly see the mirroring, and you might actually even sort of, I don't know if you want to call it mirroring or parroting, depending on how kind of critical you are of it, but sort of that's quite clearly Dad saying something and then one sentence later her essentially repeating the same thing. So she has very similar values and views to her father, which is a good thing, of course, if your father has the right views, but you can see how if you are of this culture and you follow Pashtunwali, then you might be a little bit more critical of these sort of things. So I'm just going to underline these so you can see them a bit more clearly. Then I'll read them. So, bottom of 54, in our society, for a girl to flirt with any man brings shame on the family, though it's all right for the man. We were told she had committed suicide, but we later discovered her family had poisoned her. Whew, okay. Well, maybe we feel differently about her critical stance on culture, because obviously poisoning your daughter isn't probably something that most of us would feel particularly happy about. So, whether this is true or not, this is her telling of the story. And we have a custom called swara, by which a girl can be given to another tribe to resolve a feud. It is officially banned, but still continues. So I'm going to do that for corruption, but again, you can see really clearly that she is highly critical of this culture, and kind of to the point where it's almost kind of she's directly challenging it. So life was harder for women in Afghanistan. So of course, we've got gender roles again. You're gonna, whatever colour you pick for gender roles, it's gonna get a workout. Perhaps that's why I've changed to a different colour green rather than the light one. Perhaps the other one ran out. Who knows? We've got here simile sort of snuck in there. They were forcing men to grow beards as long as a lantern. So it's a nice simile, or is it a metaphor? Grow beards as long as a lantern, let's say metaphor, but either way it's a comparison. Then, oh no, sorry, the simile is here, and that's as long as a lantern, I'm going to say, is a metaphor, but like or as is a simile, but if we want to stretch it a bit, we could call it a metaphor. So wearing a burqa is like walking inside big fabric shuttlecock with only a grill to see through, and on hot days it's like an oven. At least I didn't have to wear one. He said that the Taliban had even banned women from laughing out loud or wearing white shoes, as white was a colour that belonged to men. Women were being locked up and beaten just for wearing nail varnish. So I've got a little fear drawing there as well, because that's, you can see not only is she critical of it, but she feels a little bit removed from it because she's relatively safe behind the activism of her father, but also she's concerned about it. So last line, I will protect your freedom, Malala, carry on with your dreams. So you can see that she, is so confident and so sort of outspoken in her beliefs.